And welcome back. Let's go ahead and continue working on our game. We want to introduce our jump system. Now there's a couple different ways that we can approach this, but the first thing we do want to do is look at our player input here. And if we look, we currently have a action set for our move, look, and fire, but there's no jump action here. If you already have a jump action here, that's perfectly fine, but if you don't, you can easily add one, so I'm going to add that. And what we want to do is set this up with a binding type here, right? So we want to make sure that this is bound to a certain path. In this case, for example, it might be pressing the spacebar. So if we come over here into our path, we can go you can go search for, or you can tap the listen button here, and I can press, for example, the spacebar, and you can see the space will show up then. I can put that, and then it'll be space keyboard. And I just want to make sure I use that in the keyboard and mouse control scheme. And if I want to add an additional property to this one, I can actually hit add binding here. So for example, if I want a gamepad one, since I don't have a gamepad on here, I can usually come in here, and I can also look for example, maybe I want to use button south as that, and I hit gamepad and check that one. And that's how I can control what these mappings are. So real quick refresh that. I'm going to make sure that this gets saved here. So I hit save asset, and let's go ahead and close that. And so now we have a jump button on here, so that should take care of that. Now if we look at our player object and we look inside of the player input script, one of the different things we have on here is this onJump command, and that's what we're going to actually use and call to actually have that jump action be executed. Popping on over into our code, let's go ahead and add in a new thing here. If you remember before, we had a private void onMove, so we're going to do the same thing here, except we're calling this one onJump. And just like before, we had an input value equals value. We can use the kind of the same parameter here, even though it's the same variable name. It's perfectly okay that we're reusing it because value only exists here. Now inside the method is going to be a little bit different because we're not using a vector2 here. Now the way to think about onJump is that when we did onMove, that relied on us on that vector2 because it's from saying, hey, we're going to move in a certain direction. But with onJump, even though yes, we're going to be moving, that jump may not be something we're looking for. So we instead want to kind of have it rely more on, instead of player movement, have it rely on a button press. So in here, we're going to do if value dot, and of course we have an option for is pressed, and that's simply just saying, hey, if this value is pressed, go ahead and call this. And I'm just going to add a little comment here that says do some action, because we're going to come back to this. And what do we want to do? Well, we're going to, again, still have to have it do some kind of action here, right? Even though, so we press that button, what do we want the player to do? We want that player to jump. And if we think about this, we have a rigid body on that player, and we have defined that rigid body as the player rigid body. So we're going to go ahead and add that in down here. So let's add in our player rigid body. And what we want to do is have it plus equal that to another value. Well, that value is actually another vector2, so we're going to make a new vector2. And we want a x and a y direction. We're going to say that's 0 direction in the f because we are not looking to move forward or back. But we are, of course, going to have a y direction. We're just going to call that jump speed for now. And of course, we haven't yet defined what jump speed is, so we're going to need to do that. And so, just like how before we had a kind of a default value for player speed, we're going to repeat that process. Let's go ahead and make a serialized field here. And we'll make another float. We're going to call this our jump speed. And we don't need it to be as fast as the player speed, so we can initialize this to 5 float, and that's perfectly fine. We can, of course, always jump these into new values because we, again, have this in a serialized field, so it allows us to make those changes in the inspector. Now you notice I do have a red squiggle here because I forgot something here. If you remember, this of course doesn't directly control the action. We actually need to add in a velocity. Easy thing to forget there. Of course we need the velocity because that again is what's actually determining the speed and direction. So that will handle that for us. Now if we test our code here in Unity, see I've already started my game, we should be able to expect this player character to now have a kind of jump animation. So if I just I'm standing still, nothing's going on, I press the jump. Oh, look, there he goes. He's now jumping. Perfect. Now, it's not necessarily 100% perfect. We might want to add a little bit more dynamicism, but you can see we now have the ability to jump. That's pretty cool. And if I hold down my run key, you can see we actually get a longer jump here. So that is, again, mapping to some pretty cool things. Now, one thing, of course, we may want to tune here is going back into the game world just for a minute here. All right, on here, of course, we have our player character. You know, he's moving along, and I may want to adjust this. You know, so let's say he's running, and I jump. Maybe I want to adjust how far he can jump. So, for example, one thing you can notice, I can pressing jump, and he will keep coming down, up. So there's no limit here on the jump, which might be cool if we want like a double jump or something like that. But right now, we don't necessarily need that. Also, of course, I want to have some control maybe over my speed, or I might have issues with certain collisions and stuff like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump back up. And while I'm in play mode here, because I can edit things fine, I'll have to go back and edit them in the real settings. I can go ahead and manipulate some of these features here to try to get this player character the way I want. So in the rigid body of the player, so I'm just going to collapse these, I can open up and take a look at a couple different things here. So we have, for example, our gravity scale. Now our gravity scale is 1, which means it is using 1 times the default project settings. And there's a whole project settings. If you come in here into your file, you will find that you can adjust pretty much the whole system for those project settings. And that's cool, but we don't want to necessarily do that. We only want to control the player right now. And so we can, of course, play around this player scale. So, for example, right now, when the player were to fall, let's just have him kind of jump. You can see the speed at which he falls. But if I want him to snap down faster to the ground, so let's just make that 2, for example. All right, you will see that he doesn't jump up nearly as high anymore, right? And that's because that gravity force is now pulling down even farther. And I can counteract that because if you remember, in our player jump, we now have the ability to control how much of that jump we are using. One thing before I go and adjust that, though, you'll notice my collision mode is set to discrete. I want to change that right now to continuous. All right, so let's just uncheck this real quick and make sure we change that to continuous. The reason why I'm going to do that to continuous is because it's going to make it always look for an edge. If it's discrete, there's a chance that might happen that our player character accidentally clips through the floor someplace and ends up being someplace they don't need to be. So we don't want that to happen. So I'm just going to make sure that's on continuous there. Now the other thing I'm going to open up real quick is my player speed, my jump speed. I'm actually going to bump my player speed up just a little here because I felt like you can move a little faster. And let's go ahead and bump that jump speed up to 10 just so we can see that. And again, let's put our gravity. We wanted that to snap down a little bit more. I'm going to put that 2 just to kind of see how that feels. Wait for the game to load up. Boop, and here we are. So now, of course, we have our player moving. And we can see we're jumping pretty high, so that's our jump speed. And you can see how gravity is, of course, trying to kind of pull us down. So we, of course, still can jump, which is not something we're looking for quite yet. But my movement feels a little snappier, and of course, my run speed looks really great. And one of the things that you want to do when you start fine-tuning this is start asking yourself, okay, if I just press 1 jump, for example, I'm in 3 deep here. If I press 1 jump, can my player get out here? And it looks like he can't quite get out, so I might have to fine-tune that just a little bit to see if he can get up there. Now, of course, I can mess with the gravity and mess with the jump speed. So, for example, if I make my gravity 3, make my jump speed 12, you know, I can do that on the fly here to kind of see how that really plays around. Or bump this up to 15. You can see now he's getting up there, but he's maybe just a little too high for what I want. So again, you can, play around with these values until you find something that is appropriate for what you want. So here's a jump. He's not quite there, so maybe I'll scale gravity. I'll put that back down to 3. So he's got a pretty good high jump here, and maybe just a little too much. But when he's in here, if I press the jump, boop, there he is. So, boop. We're going to, again, play around with this. And you can play around with this however you want to try and get to that value that you want. But I think this 3 and 15 will work pretty good here. So I'm just going to uncheck the playtest, put that back at 3, put that 15. And that's going to be a good start there. Now, there are going to be some things that we need to clean up, such as that double jump there. And if we wanted to add a custom animation to this, we could, of course, do that as well. So if you remember, when we have our on move, we didn't set an animation for there. However, we did create animations for player run, player walk. And in our sprite assets, one thing you can look is you can see in here, if I go to my sprites and open up the hero, we do have what kind of looks like a jump animation here. I'm not going to go ahead and do that for now because I think right now the running animation will be sufficient. However, if you want that extra challenge, you can do that. But again, I'm not going to do that right now because I think I want to focus first on getting this jump animation itself wired down before I start worrying about what that player sprite actually looks like.